Now, in your book, you talk about police culture. How do these bulletins, the danger, the videos of danger, the dread of danger, how does that affect police culture?
The way I describe it in the book is that these examples are both a product and a cause of culture. So there's a perpetual question about, well, what came first? The structure or culture? Is culture something that emerges or something that exists outside of our institutions like schools or police departments or hospitals? And what I try to argue in the book is that it's not to say that police are the only people that care about danger or threat. I think that's very obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine if at your job, well, let's take my job as a professor. Daily bulletins about the threat of violence don't make a lot of sense in my world. Why? Well, because it doesn't fit into the other parts of the structure in which I exist. Okay. I didn't go through a socialization process where I was told about how dangerous my job was. I'm actually not expected to do anything about violence. I'm certainly not expected to arrest people in my job. So these bulletins don't make a whole lot of sense in the context that I live in, within my cultural context as a professor. But it turns out within policing, the values, the assumptions, the emphasis on violence means that something like a officer safety bulletin or hot sheets or these videos, they make perfect sense. And once you begin to use these mechanisms to reinforce the values and assumptions of that institutional space, like the preoccupation with violence, the necessity of ensuring officer safety, the possibility that the public may try and hurt you at any moment, you actually begin to recreate the very culture that you're basing those things off in the first place. And it becomes a self-perpetuating phenomenon. You can think of it as almost a cultural inertia. And so it's difficult to say for sure, was it the bulletins that made the culture or was it the culture that made the bulletins? I think it's more useful to think about what are the things that are sort of speaking to each other? What's in dialect? What's causing this self-perpetuating phenomenon of the danger imperative? In part because I only observed police in 2014 to 2018. And my informed suspicion is that you saw this emphasis on officer safety and survival likely kick off in the 1970s when we saw police deaths. We saw their peaks in the 1970s. We saw the beginning of sort of what you might think of as modern gun culture in the 1970s. This is part of another project that I'm beginning to work on, but okay. I can't speak to it conclusively, but I do believe this culture existed for a long time. And what I'm looking at right now is how does it continue to exist today?
So you said it all started from Michael Brown. What did your research tell you about interaction with the police with other ethnicities, cultures, genders, if there was a difference in the way they would interact with other genders?
So when I began the work in 2014, I think that my prior was that I would see really clear evidence of overt racial animus in my ride-alongs with police. And to be very frank, I didn't see it. I didn't see examples of racial epithets. I didn't see examples of overt brutality, for example, which I've been asked about. Like, well, tell me about the times that you saw officers, be brutal. And I didn't see what I think. I didn't see a beating like you would see captured on for YouTube or something like that. Those things happen, but I didn't see them. And I think that they are, in the grand scheme of police interaction, rare. What I think I did begin to see was that the system that I talk about in the book is one in which, even if I were to make the assumption that officers are perfectly egalitarian, they don't see race, they're perfectly not racist. Let's imagine we have a perfect filtering mechanism.
Okay.
And we don't have any racist cops. Mm-hmm. Nothing else has changed in the system. Segregation still exists. Broken schools still exist. The rest of structural racism continues to operate as it always has. And I'm going to be sending officers, because of where crime and violence are, again, because these things are social, they're something that's generated by poverty and disinvestment. I'm going to keep sending cops to the same places, and they're going to be preoccupied with their safety in the same places. And so it makes perfect sense that I would see inequalities in police violence concentrating in the same places over time. Now, to be clear, I think the assumption of perfectly egalitarian officers is a very strong assumption. We have mountains of evidence to suggest that officers are not perfectly egalitarian and that racial bias and overt racism are real and exist in police departments today. What I want to highlight for listeners and for readers is that if you think this is a story of especially racist cops, you're missing the boat here. Mm-hmm. This is a story of a system that in many cases protects those officers, but it doesn't depend on those officers. I could be a perfectly well-meaning person and put them in a police department, and they are going to do things in the name of officer safety that at the aggregate, in the macro level, look like inequalities in police violence that break down along race and that break down along gender. And I think an important point as well for listeners is that I saw officers use violence against Black people, against white people, against Latino people. My particular method of observing directly is not really good for making claims about percentage of officers did this versus that, because again, I don't have a random sample. It's not designed to make that kind of claim. But this is something that affects all people. We have other data which shows that it disproportionately affects Black people and Latino people and men. But I've seen a Black officer be incredibly disrespectful and aggressive towards a white woman. Like, this is not like white women are not utterly insulated from this. This is a problem about the system. But to be clear, someone that looks like you or looks like me, if I was a betting man, we have a higher likelihood of being treated disrespectfully and treated aggressively than my wife or a white woman who is in her home, which is the example that I observed and talk about in the book.
Can part of that be attributed to the fact that in a way police officers have a lot of power, and can't that affect even the most secure and angelic person's ego? Just the fact that you have this power. You said there at the beginning that everything, our laws are kind of set up to protect police officers and protect their safety. Wouldn't that lead to not necessarily an ego trip, but a kind of puff your chest out power trip when dealing with people? If you like that clip, go ahead and hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to catch up on all of our latest content. Don't forget to hit the notification button when you do subscribe so you can get updated every time we release content. We release content every day, whether it's an actual show or clips from the shows. So go ahead and subscribe, like, comment. Also, don't forget our Patreon page where you can find our Talking Straight-ish and After Hours Uncensored episodes. That's patreon.com/Unsolicited Perspectives. But once again, thank you again for listening to Unsolicited Perspectives. I'm your host, Bruce Anthony, and I'm going to catch you next time. I'll holla.